Right. Some statements this week from Catherine Austin Fitz that is more near the mark than much of her previous stuff, and perhaps this is indicative of faction issues. And she said, we are in the process that I would recall a global reset. The entire financial system is being reset. There are two aspects of this. One is extending the old system and the other bringing in a new system. And it's very much being done on the fly by trial and error. But the new system is 100% digital. And she said, if you look at the tyranny they are working on delivering, I don't think most people realise how hideous some of their plans are. So the tyranny that's coming and printing that's coming is greater than anything we've seen so far. The Fed started a new round of quantitative easing in March, and if you look at the extent of that, it is extraordinarily inflationary. Now, Kim has spoken of the digital wallet, and there was mention of funds in March. And Trump has asked on national TV this week, where did all the money come from? Now, given we were only told that the trust has that sort of funds, I really need Kim to bring some clarity to this situation, as many people are now getting concerned of how the trustee is operating. And so for hers and our sake, please deliver some clarity on the situation without the malice that has preceded other questions. Proper answers can cool the mistrust. And Catherine Austin Fitz said, that's because this time round, the Fed is not just doing $3 trillion in quantitative easing. What the Fed has done in 3 or 4 months is what it took them to do in 3 to 5 years during the so-called financial crisis of 2008, and that is an extraordinary amount. Then you combine it with the fiscal stimulus, because the Fed is now buying the treasuries, and the treasuries is sending checks out to Main Street. And we are seeing that money going into the economy, and that will be inflationary. We are basically entering into a war period, and it's dangerous. There are many different layers, but this is what the World War III looks like. The people running things and centralising economic power and control are saying we don't want to share the subsidy anymore with the general population. That is correct. And she's also correct in stating this is a spiritual war between good and evil. And part of that war spreads out to invisible technology like mind control. Again, things we've been warning about. And if you look at where they want to go, she said, their vision is so dark that I think the more people recognise it and see it, the more they are going to want simple assets that they can control, that are not digital, and try to keep them outside the system. Globally, I think the pressure is going to be on having precious metals, she said. So, with all that distraction and madness over, now we move on to the madness of the rest of the world. And I received this via one of our German members, and they'd said that Germany had closed the borders already about the mass demonstration for freedom against the totalitarian regime following the COVID craze in Berlin. And she said, what do you know more? That the 29th of August in Berlin is going to be historic. And to inform and encourage you that the demonstration is expecting about 5 million protesters. It turns out there was 4 million. not the rubbish they put on alt media and also the mainstream media. And the purpose is to stay until the government resigns. We have food and drink for 5 days. And an airline company who does not yet want to go public will bring protesters from many parts of the world. If the government falls, they will return the money to the passengers. Several bus companies have promised to do the same. 1,200 buses bringing protesters in from many cities around Europe, and they will not return until the government falls. A general of the German military is going to resign, apparently. Ships and boats are going to block the River Spree. Even helicopters will demonstrate in the air. The police are mainly on our side, and they will not intervene for masks or distance. We want to paralyse all of Berlin. Camps are to be set up over Berlin, and soon this madness will end. Now, it was a fairly successful demonstration, and yes, there was the usual paid actors thrown into it, as referenced by Harold Tears on the Zoom call yesterday. But the main group of protesters are now moving on to Warsaw, Poland for September the 12th, and I'm sure many of our Polish members will be there and fighting a good cause. Zimbabwe next, and unable to protest on the streets, which has been banned, some activists in Zimbabwe are calling themselves keyboard warriors, as they are using social media and graffiti to put pressure on a government that promised reform but is now accused of gross human rights abuses. Now, the activists used the hashtag Zimbabwe and Lives Matter, Zimbabwean Lives Matter, to encourage increased global pressure on the President Emerson Mnangagwa government. Tens of thousands of people, from Jamaican reggae stars to US rap and hip-hop musicians, have joined African celebrities, politicians and former presidents in tweeting with the hashtag. However, some analysts say online protests might not be enough to move the president, who increasingly relies on security forces to crush dissent, despite promising reforms when he took power after a coup in 2017. Tensions are now rising anew in the once prosperous southern African country, and inflation now there is over 800%, amid acute shortages of water, electricity, fuel and banknotes, and a health system collapsing under the weight of drug shortages and strikes by nurses and doctors. Revelations of alleged corruption related to the COVID-19 medical supplies led to the sacking of the health minister and put further pressure on Mr. Mnangagwa, the president, and his government has responded to the rising dissent with arrests and alleged abductions and torture. Now, before July, few Zimbabweans knew about Jacob Negative-Hume, who is a fringe opposition politician, and then he went on social media to announce an anti-government protest planned for the end of July. And the July 31st movement swelled dramatically after that, and the government panicked and jailed him, the opposition politician, and also the journalist Hopewell Chinono, deployed the military and police to thwart the protest and arrested dozens of people who tweeted about it. That's in Zimbabwe. We've now got reports coming in of another major US city is emptying out of people. Following New York and California, and a new one is emptying out like someone's farted in an elevator, is Chicago. Now, I wonder who forecasted that some time back. Next stop, Miami, Seattle, San Francisco. What happens when they all empty out? Did you know that Greenland is gaining ice at record levels and earlier than ever before? Normally there is a spike in mid-September of increased ice. This year it started August the 8th. Aspen, Colorado got its first snow last week, normally not seen until October. Ice Age, anyone? Want to know how to bamboozle bots with one question? Ask where is the proof the media is correct in what they state. Message to the fascist police in Australia. The world is watching you, and we the people will have our day. Not by violence, but judgment. TikTok. Last month, a Turkish warship came one step away from firing missiles at a French naval vessel off the coast of Libya, and in response, Paris suspended its involvement in Operation Sea Guardian, which is a multinational maritime effort to provide security in the Mediterranean Sea and halt the arms trafficking fueling Libya's ongoing civil war. Now, initially, only 8 member states, notably excluding both the US and the UK, supported France's official complaint. And this was only the latest incident in the increasingly frequent and exceedingly awkward tensions between several of Washington's core NATO allies now. Indeed, from South America to East Asia, NATO members stand divided over many critical foreign policy issues at the moment. And on the subject of NATO, as with much else, this article stated that President Trump is obtuse and ill-informed. Yes, courtesy of Langley and deep state actors is why, plus an unhealthy allegiance to Israel. Now, the article said, only here he isn't exactly wrong. In fact, recent events raise serious concerns about the 70-year-old alliance's lingering relevance and utility, as in what, so to speak, is NATO actually for. And it says surely that Donald Trump is hardly a bridge builder, but the media's temptation to blame him alone for NATO's growing fissures ultimately misses the mark, and also the backstory. And while his foreign policy fiascos have widened divisions, the alliance's inherent contractions and hypocrisies long preceded Mr. Trump. Indeed, some of the current fractures traces back to NATO's complicated genesis, the rest mainly to the problematic pivot after the collapse of its justification boogeyman, the Soviet Union, and its leading American member hyper-imperial post-9/11 term. It's all too easy to forget that a crumbled Berlin Wall, 1989, and a collapsed Soviet Union, 1991, very well could and possibly should have spelt the end of an inherently anti-Russian NATO. But it didn't, did it? However, misreading internal Soviet collapse as a personal victory, Washington then fell prey to triumphalist delusions and opportunistically maintained NATO to abet its unipolar destiny. Then, even after Mikhail Gorbachev stunningly agreed to the reunification within NATO of Germany, which was a two-time 20th century invader of his mother Russia, a succession of US presidents reneged on the Soviet premier's one requested, if not informal, quid pro quo of any extension of the zone of NATO is unacceptable. Now, Gorbachev had then warned to the Secretary of State then, James Baker, who assured him there would be no extension of NATO's jurisdiction for forces of NATO 1 inch to the east. Though he and many analysts later quibbled about the promise's exact meaning and scope. Exactly. And this is on a par with George Herbert Walker's Bush promise in the Church Committee that no more would the CIA interfere with the news media. Like the NATO assurance, they predictably lied. It is how they've always operated. And you wonder why America is frowned upon. Instead, it wasn't 3 years before President Bill Clinton kicked off NATO's eastward expansion that's now reached into the formal boundaries of the old Soviet Union and to the very borders of the current Russian Federation. But Clinton was forced into attacking Yugoslavia against his own wishes by the CIA and the deep state actors. And that is what you get when you allow the wrong head to think for you and have sex with the monarch Mossad-based agent called Lewinsky. But NATO is collapsing. Countries maybe have taken on board what our show and the trustee has been saying all along. They are a private army designed to take over and rule the countries using the fake climate bill to fund them. Russia is not the collusion, but the illusion. A convenient boogeyman used to spread fear and hate whilst the greed-based psychopaths plotted against and took over all the countries in between. NATO is a deliberate anagram of Aton. And we are back to all roads lead, not back to Rome, but to Egypt. For the more modern day story, and to India for the past story. The Saudi Crown Prince has been due to stage public meetings with the Israeli Prime Minister, but cancelled the trip over fears details had been leaked, according to sources. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, pulled out of a planned visit to DC this week to meet the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after he feared that the news CIA had leaked out and that his presence in the US capital would become a nightmare. It had not yet been agreed whether the meeting between the Crown Prince and Netanyahu would have been recorded and then announced or conducted live in front of the cameras. But those pushing for it to happen, which included US President Donald Trump and his son-in-law and advisor and clone Jared Kushner, see the prospect of a handshake between the men as a way to relaunch Mohammed bin Salman's image as a young Arab peacemaker, and also shore up regional support for the US brokered deal between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. Now, in the ensuing statement, the Crown Prince would have stopped short of now announcing recognition of Israel, but the meeting itself would have been the strongest hint that the kingdom was also on a path towards normalizing relations. My own personal opinion on this is I think he feared being arrested, to be honest, as US and Israel agents are setting up several countries in that region. The United Arab Emirates will become another proxy state of Israel. And then we come to Kushner and what he said this week. And clearly he is blatantly unaware of the sheer irony of his scripted statement this week, where he said the Palestinians live in the past, whilst backing Israel's thousands of years old claim to the land. I guess irony is lost on the wax dummy. No, Mr. Kushner, there is zero evidence of Israel as a country, a state, or a region ever existing, period. Just because some book written by Crown agents in the UK, like King James, says so, does not make it fact. Where is the proof? And the better question is Kushner a clone? Because he sure looks like wax and rubber to me.